last time we were looking at site-specific art, especially minimalist and earthworks examples, such as the Mary Miss that we have on campus, which we visited in person. And then we looked at Robert Smithson's Spiral Jetty, Walter de Maria's Lightning Field, and a few other examples from the 60s and 70s. Thinking about the connections between the specificity of a place and the kind of work, materials, ideas, how all of that kind of comes together to reinforce a sense of the site's history and what kind of work would make sense in that place. So not just kind of like plunking any old work, sculpture, let's say, onto a field, but instead engaging with that site's history, what kinds of local traditions or cultures might engage with that site, and making it a really special piece. Now this week, we're considering that again. We're still thinking about site specificity, but we're looking particularly at the connections to architecture, whether it's a public sculpture that looks like or is influenced by actual building and construction techniques, actual images of buildings, like Bruce Naumann's House Divided, which structurally speaking and in terms of materials, it's not really like architecture. But if we look at the form of the sculpture, it is obviously influenced by the archetype of like a house or a barn, anything with that kind of pitched roof that we see there, even though it subverts any idea of what architecture should look like or what it should be. And Christine Tarkowski is also playing on that in her piece, Working on a Failed Utopia, taking a page from Buckminster Fuller's Geodesic Dome, which is that kind of segmented dome-like space that was envisioned originally as a utopian form. So a form that could encase an entire city, or could itself be a form for a new kind of like civilization in terms of the buildings that would be made for this new utopian society. Of course, she's playing on that by calling it Working on a Failed Utopia and showing images of garbage within the structure, but nevertheless. So playing along those ideas of architecture and how it connects to public sculpture are really important to those two pieces, and we'll talk more about that on the discussion boards this week. We read a couple of pieces this week. One was by Dolores Hayden, who is an architectural scholar and theorist. She's done a lot to contribute to the conversations about architecture and race and gender. I show a couple of screenshots, one from when she was speaking as part of a panel on African American history and preservation in architecture. And the other is her talking to Phil Donahue, for those who remember the Donahue show, about the idea of a non-sexist city, which she wrote about in the late 70s and early 80s. So there she's showing what a non-sexist city might look like. So she's written a lot on architecture and feminism as well. And she focuses in all her work on this idea of the power of place. So how do you create a sense of place, and why is that a powerful concept? Why is that an important concept? So I'm kind of curious to hear a little bit more from you all what you think about that idea. So in the piece we read for today, she writes specifically about an American sense of place. And I'm quoting from that. She says, "It is this dream," this is near the introduction, by the way. "It is this dream of a common language that I want to explore, as it applies to the search for an American sense of place by architects, designers, and urban planners. Some of the most celebrated examples of American postmodern architecture of the 1970s could have been built anywhere, except the American towns or cities they were meant for." What I wanted to highlight here is she says it is this dream of a common language. Now, so she says, search for an American sense of place. So is there such a thing as an American sense of place? Is there a kind of common American language in art or architecture that we can talk about? I don't know. Some of the most celebrated examples of American postmodern architecture, so seemingly critiquing it and saying it wasn't site specific, it didn't have the kinds of local symbolism that it should have. It didn't engage with the history of the site like it should have. It didn't take into consideration the context in which it was being designed for and placed. What do you think she means by an American sense of place? And what is the connection between architecture, a sense of place, and public art? And I'm showing a couple examples from Chicago here. On the left is a mural that's underneath the metro station in Hyde Park. And the other one is the well-known Cloud Gate by Anish Kapoor downtown. So what do you think the connection between all of these is? Now, how does that relate to some of what we also read for today in terms of the Anthony Caro interview with Norman Foster?